There we go. Sweet. So share screen, share. Let's make this a bit bigger. There we go. Okay, can people see that? We are also recording.
I see the time.
Okay, cool. So I will, so what I was saying is I will go through a couple of different sites and of varying complexity. So I've got my personal website, which is quite complex with lots of custom blocks, lots of custom functionality, some kind of general sites that I've built, and then kind of one that's in the middle where they've got a bit of custom functionality, and just kind of show you the workflow, the way that I build out sites, and also explain why I've kind of made the transition to Gutenberg for me personally with my business and for clients. And then if you have any questions, we can do a big Q&A at the end. So I don't repeat myself, or I may answer your question halfway through. So we will start with, which site should we start with? We'll start with my podcast website. So this is a fairly straightforward site, although it doesn't seem to be, the SVGs don't seem to load for some reason. Great start. Just trying to think what site. We'll start with my personal site to begin with. So this is my personal site. I track a lot of data about myself, and most people are not going to need these types of things, but I will at least I'll at least give you an idea of how and what you can do. So the underlying architecture, if we go into the back end, is if I go to plugins, is GeneratePress is the theme, followed by GP Premium, which is the pro plugin kind of add-on for the GeneratePress theme. We have Generate Blocks and Generate Blocks Pro. These 4 plugins, or theme and 3 plugins, are built by the same developer. The nice thing about it is GeneratePress theme is fully, pretty much fully accessible outside of the box. So you've got skip links, you've got all of the correct markup for your headers, footers, when you're creating posts like articles and things like that. Both plugins work very well together. So when I refer to the Generate stack, that means basically GeneratePress and Generate Blocks, because they kind of come together. The developer for these 2 plugins is very, very conscious about lightweight, minimal, clean code, and accessibility, which obviously are very important for speed. A lot of people move to Oxygen because of the speed. Accessibility is something I think a lot of people know they need to implement, but because of time issues and money and budget and things like that, sometimes gets neglected. So having a lot of the accessibility done for you out of the box is very nice and handy. And then also just being lightweight and very careful about the decisions he's made. So if I go to the Generate Blocks website, he has it started with 4 blocks. We had the container, the grid, the headline, and the button. And then in recent updates, we've got an image and a query loop. And these are the fundamentals of building out your Gutenberg site. We are also getting in the next update a tabs and accordions, which are some nice things to have, and sometimes we've been missing it. I think when I switched over to Gutenberg, they're probably the only 2 things that I kind of missed that we had in like Oxygen, or come as default in other things like Elementor and things. But the developer is very, very kind of specific about what he lets into the plugin, what he adds to the plugin. Every decision is carefully looked at, You know, we've been asking for, you know, lots of features, and you see lots of people making requests in the forums and things like that. And they're just kind of like the Elementor flares, if you kind of will. And so these are kind of like bare bone blocks that we use to build out every website. So Generate Blocks and the Generate Blocks Pro, the Generate Blocks Pro comes with some nice things like the global styles, which a lot of people that come from Oxygen would know that we have classes to style our elements. We have button classes, we have spacing classes, things like that. Generate Blocks goes a slightly different route and uses something called this global styles. Now, what this is it's a similar concept. So what I can do is I show you Generate Blocks, global styles. It's similar to that, however, it's slightly more limited. Now, it can be seen as a downside because you can't apply multiple global styles to your blocks. However, because of the way that I'm building sites now, I've realized that classes were very much overcomplicating stuff. And yes, they kept consistency by a long stretch, but they also added time on, a lot more time, because you're having to build out these classes, or you can use framework, for example, but you're still having to set up all of the styles. And for a lot of the sites I build, which are brochure sites and portfolio sites, it's very over-engineered, I've realized. And so I've been trying to keep consistency while not over complicating or over-engineering it for every little detail. So on this site, we've got a buttons global style. I only have one button style for this site, but what you do is you give your button a name and a label. You can then set all of your styles for this button. And then when you go to add a new page, you can select this button style. Now you can do this for, you can add as many global styles as you want, and these elements can then, you can select these elements and kind of globally control the designs, so the buttons and things like that. So if I go back, I have a card design. So on my website, this like card with the border and the white background. I've got a couple of different ones here. So I've got a basic card. I've got a card with padding, just a normal padding one, and a padding with a bottom border. Now, yes, I've duplicated these styles. So if I added padding in here or borders and things like that, I have to do that to the other ones, but they're all in one place. So for me, it's not a big hassle to, you're not going to be updating these classes very, very often. But if you did, you can just update them on one or two across the site, and it's all in one place. Same with your headings. I've got a small headline pre-heading block in here. Kyle Van Duzen has a great YouTube video on creating a starter site where he goes through setting up kind of these global styles, and he has a lot of different ones. This is a website that I have been working on for a client, and if I show you the global styles for this one, just trying to think of what other websites that I've built that has a good example of that. So in the global styles, you see we've got containers. This follows slightly what Kyle Van Duzen has. We've got a default container which just has default padding. We've got a small container size, and we've got a large. So quickly, when I put a container in a section, which is the equivalent to an Oxygen div, because you can nest these containers as deep as you want, I can say, do I want this to be a large padding, small padding, or kind of big padding? And that's equivalent to if you had Oxy Ninja or automatic CSS, and you've got your padding, small padding, large, things like that. Let me just pause this for. So again, they're very simple and easy to set up. The buttons, we've got, again, here I've got a large version and a small version, and you could say, you're duplicating the code. But again, if I'm going to change this, and I was going to say, actually, I want all of these hover colors to have this green effect rather than this black, I'm just going to go here and do this. And, you know, it's very, very quick, very, very simple. And all of my buttons are here. So I've got a button, a secondary, an accent, small, large, ones without any padding, and then this, and then just an alternative one. And they're all managed in here. And on the front end, they get this nice GB button dash the name, so you can keep everything consistent. We have the customizer. So if I go to the customizer, this is where you can set your other global things. So your colors, for example. So we have a nice color palette, and these use CSS variables. So you can reference this in your advanced scripts, WP codebox, your child theme styles. You can use CSS variables as you're probably used to if you use a framework, and you can set kind of stuff, things like your body, your content for your H1s, your H2s, things like that. You can kind of set in here, and all your other colors. You've got your typography, so you can choose your fonts that you want, and then you can set them for the different things. So again, you've got the H1, your H2, your H3s, and you can then also set the font weights, the uppercase or lowercase, font sizes, and it has breakpoints as well. So you can set this for tablet and mobile. So you can set all of these sizes. You can even give your own, you can target your own element. So you can add your own custom selector, and you can obviously style that and configure it using the same method. So that is the typography. You've got some other things in here, kind of how you want to use your CSS and print out your files, so that you want it to be inline or you want them to be separate files. And then you've got kind of like layout things, so controlling your header and footer, the padding, things like that. You could say that the header is probably the most limiting part when you think about for the markup, because GeneratePress does such a good job of making everything accessible. I recommend using their header, but you can hook into the header and add your own stuff like a call to action button, things like that. But there are lots of different options and designs that you can choose. And again, Carl Van Dusen has a great tutorial on how you can add like a few lines of CSS to change the positions of like your menu and things. So for example, this site has the menu underneath the logo, and on the podcast website we have it as like an inline thing like you're kind of used to. So yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing. You have the option to set sidebars. So on my personal website, I make use of this. So I have a left sidebar, right sidebar, and a middle content. You can very easily override that to just set to no sidebars on everything. And that gives you basically the oxygen in a content, and you can then add your own sidebars if you want to, or whatever. The nice thing about using the sidebars built in is that, again, they've got the right HTML tags, like using the aside tag and things like that in the article. And so things are, will be accessible, and you can hook into them very easily. But that's not to say you can't use or create your own sidebars and things like that. So the blog is the new, because of the query loop that came out. This is slightly redundant, but I do make use of this blog feature in my main website because of all of the different card layouts I have, which I'll kind of get onto. And the footer is, again, kind of irrelevant because we can use the GeneratePress templating system to create our own footer, and I'll show you that. So that's kind of like the global styles, global settings for your typography, all your fonts, things like that, and that's how you set most of them. And as you can see, we've got headings with your main headings. I've got a paragraph large, paragraph small, and a pre-heading. So these are how you can set up kind of classes in Gutenberg. A lot of people, like I said, would say that it's a limited because you can't stack global styles, but I think we over-engineer it sometimes, and we don't need all of those classes because we can get away with just using some basic global styles. So I will move into the generate press side of things. So generate press has different modules that you can enable and disable, which I love. So you only use the things that you want to use, and obviously we are very cautious about that as Oxygen users. We only want to load what we need. So you've got things like backgrounds and adding in a bit more functionality in the editor. The elements, this is Generate Press's equivalent of the Oxygen templates, but it is a bit more advanced, where you can see here HTML hooks and things like that. So yeah, you've got spacing and background things, which just add a bit more functionality. They do have a site library. So on their website, they have a massive library of templates that you can quickly use to import and build out sites from. So if you need to whack a website together, you can take an existing site template kind of thing and modify it, and you're off to the races, really. This sets all of your global styles in the customize and things like that. And it's a nice way of, especially if you're starting out, you can easily see how pages are built up and how things are made, how they've created these sections. So if you are interested, I would dive in, install some of these, and just see how they're built and what they're made up of, really. There are a couple of elemental ones in here which are like near the bottom, but for the main part of it, they're all Gutenberg, and just use generate blocks alongside it. They do have an off-canvas panel. So on the mobile, on mobile, they have this kind of like expanding, which is how Elementor menus, I think, are the kind of like the default, and you can see they expand. I prefer this menu style. I much prefer this. However, if we compare it to the admin bar, for example, Kyle much prefers the off canvas. Not my preference. I much prefer having it drop down rather than the off canvas, but there is the option to have either or in there. You can even have both if you wanted to, I think, because you can have a secondary nav. So in your main nav, you can actually add a hamburger menu and then have that slide out on desktop, for example. So the options are there. This site's not finished, by the way, so that's why things look a bit kind of all over the place sometimes. But you've got like a secondary nav up here that you can hook into, and they all use the WordPress menu. So inside of here, if we go to appearance menus, you can see it's just made up of all of the standard WordPress functions, which is great. And again, the markup is very clean and easy to use. We'll move into the elements, which is the templating system that I was talking about. And this is why I love Generate Press so much. So you have a couple of options when you're choosing a new element. You can either use block, which is building with the block editor. So it's just like selecting Oxygen template, archive, and then building out your template. Hook, which allows you to do pretty much the same as what the block does, where you can hook things in or select an archive template, but gives you an editor, so you can just put PHP straight into it rather than having the block editor. Layout is just being able to set, for example, the widths, or if you wanted to say on the single blog post, or I want to have a sidebar, you can set that. And then the header, again, is just a way you can set header information. So if we start with the archive loop, actually, we'll start with. I'm not sure I understand. If we start with the main layout, it gives you the options here. So you can say content, you can choose content sidebar, sidebar content. You can kind of see how things are positioned. So on my personal website, I use this one here where it's sidebar, content, sidebar. For the most part, you'll probably set this main layout to no sidebars, because then you get full control over the full width of the page like you're used to. Footer, again, because we use elements, the elements to create our footer, this is relevant, but because of the progression of GeneratePress and how it has moved along, there's kind of like legacy support still in there with sites that still use these footer widgets. That is obviously irrelevant now. The disable elements is a nice functionality. It allows you to disable things on the pages. So you can set, the site header, the mobile top bar, your navigation, the default kind of GeneratePress theme comes with the featured image and title that is at the top of every page. So you can kind of disable that there, like the meta field, meta information. Your content, so you can set here if you want to be full width or you can contain it. So, depending on how you want your width. But again, we can control that with our own templates like we're used to in Oxygen by adding in an inner content kind of thing. And then display rules, this is where you can control where your layout or template is going to appear. So normally in Oxygen, we would go in, we would say this is a archive for the single blog post. In here, you have all of these options. So you have blog, front page, all archives, 404 template, the post, so that's single post, or your archive, your category archives, page, and if you have a media attachments page. But we can also use an exclusion. So you can say, I want the entire site except this one page, or I want all of my blog archive except this specific category, for example. And this is where it becomes very powerful, because you can have full control, and using a priority, you can override, like we used to in Oxygen, you can override templates with a higher priority. So you have a catch-all, and then you have like a single template which overrides your catch-all, for example. So if we move to our archive loop, so this is what you would be used to for a post archive, where you've got a grid of all of your blog posts. We have a query loop. So this is the equivalent of a repeater. You are able to put whatever you want inside of your post template. So you can set anything you want. So I've just got a 2-column here, and they use dynamic data. So these are all of the styles, like I was saying, for the different blocks. So you've got a headline block, which sometimes is a bit confusing because we use the headline block, but also for paragraph text. As you can see here in the drop down, we have the option to select paragraph. By using the headline block for paragraphs and things, it gives you access on the right hand side to a lot more control over the spacing, the typography, and things like that. So if I go through the right sidebar on this block, at the top, if there is a global style that is attached to this block, you can use it. So we have here the styles that I showed. So if I click on paragraph large or small, you can see these styles that get attached. And then similar to an ID, any other settings you put in below here override that global style. We have obviously the tag names, your typography. So these are, I'll close these up quickly so we can see. So you've got typography, spacing, colors, icon, dynamic data, effects, and documentation. Some of these are GenerateBlocks Pro, so things like effects with these nice things like transform and box shadows and things. They are part of the Pro, and things like global styles as well are part of the Pro. But for typography, you get what you're used to. So you've got your font sizing, your line height, font family. If you wanted to add padding, so we can add a 20 pixel padding and set that global. So this is kind of like set it to all of them. And again, they will update. Colors, you can choose from your color palette that you've set. So again, you're going to be used to this with Oxygen. We have an icon, so we can add icons to before or above. So if you're creating card designs, sometimes we like to have a card with an icon, a headline and a text, and then a link to your service, for example. It's quite a common design. Or you can just use an icon on its own and you just remove the text. So there's lots of functionality and capabilities. You can just drop your own SVGs in there. You don't have to use the ones, but they give you kind of the free font awesome ones and most common used. You can drop whatever icon you want in there. We have dynamic data. So this is what we're used to in Oxygen to select whether we want it to be a title, ACF field. So we have a content source down here. So title, excerpt, the dates, comments, terms, all of the author meta. So if it's a blog archive like this, we can add in the name of the author. Post meta is how you would use if you were using custom fields. All you merely do, you type the name of your custom field. So if your field is called, I don't know, my field, you would just type my field. It won't show up in a drop down, but it will load the information. You can also change the data source, so you can pull it from a post type as well. So if you wanted to get information or select a specific post, and then you can then pull content directly from a single post. So if you had a sticky or like a starred post that you wanted to always be at the top of your page, for example, you could pull that post directly in, and it's going to always pull from that. We have an option to link the source. So again, you can link to your single post like you used to, or you can link to a custom field, for example, or wherever. And there's the option as well, remove block if link is empty. And I think there's also remove container if the post, if a dynamic data is empty as well. So, you know, like you're used to with conditions, that's kind of a way you can hide and show stuff. If we set that back to title. So if you wanted to hide the certain container, if there was no post meta, you can see here, remove container condition, no featured image or no post meta. So that's a bit like your conditions. If the custom field doesn't have any information, then you can hide it. There are ways to do advanced conditions on the blocks themselves. There's a hook called the render hook, and you can write. Let me show you. This is you can just write your own custom functions in there. So inside of my hooks, I'll go through how the way I've set it up. We have a render block here, so you can add a class to your block. So the classes are under here, so you get the option to add a class, and then all you have to do is you put your class name in here, and you can call your function and return true or false, for example. There is also a very nice plugin called Gutenberg Visibility Conditions or something, which adds a nice thing in the sidebar that you can add, that you can use conditions for if you don't want to write your code. But sometimes it's useful if you want to write your own custom conditions, and you use to the PHP return value. It's a very easy way to do that. On Snippet Club, I've written a function that I can, in the classes, write TCT logged out or TCT logged in, and the block basically hides or shows based on if someone's logged in or logged out on the site. We have a couple more things down in the advanced, which is attributes. So if you've got data attributes, you can add them. They support ARIA labels, data attributes, your download, your roles, things like that. And then also if you want to hide desktop, tablet, or mobile, display none is basically what that does. So they're the kind of styling, and the styles are pretty much the same across most of the blocks. the container gives you the option to set like full width or contained width, and then you have your inner contained. This will slightly change with the newer version because they're now bringing flex box, which is awesome. So you can set justified content space between things like that. So you don't have to have this in a container. But the inner container just constrains it to your kind of max, which you are most likely going to be used to if you've used the Oxygen section, which automatically constrains you to your max width that you've set globally, and this pulls in directly from the generate block settings. So that is kind of the styling and how you can set up your query loops. The image block, I'll quickly go over. It has, again, very much the same information or settings that you're used to, bar this just top one where you can set the size, the width, and if you want object fit and stuff, which is quite nice because you can set, for example, 300 pixels high and then just set cover instead of having to do like the weird background image on the div kind of thing. So that is an overview of kind of generate blocks and their blocks. Like I said, they do have a couple more buttons work in a similar way. I will show you quickly. There we go. So buttons. So buttons, you can actually add as many buttons as you want inside. And we can use our global style to say that one wants to be accent. We'll set that one to a small. We want this one to be the link. And this one to be a secondary small. So you can see we can set our button styles and add in our links, or you can set your dynamic data, for example, to be the title and things like that, like you're used to. And you've got settings on the side again. So there's a couple of other things you've got. You've got the on templates. You've got dynamic content, dynamic image. These are for bringing in. This is the dynamic content is like your inner content. Get the post, so you can bring in the post content for for blog posts, for example, or if you want to pull in the excerpt, things like that. And then the image is for pulling in the featured image, for example, but we can use the image block to do that as well. So the way that these work on the right is this is where we set our template, essentially. So when in the Oxygen, if you're referring to Oxygen, you get a drop-down list of where you want this template to be used or assigned to. So we have loop template, which is your archives, content template, which is your single blog posts. You got your right sidebar, your left sidebar if you're using those. The site footer, so we can design our footer and just set it there, or we can use the hook. Now, Generate Press theme comes with hundreds and hundreds of hooks, and these can be used anywhere to put something inside of a location. So if I go to the documentation quickly, the hooks, using hooks. So these are a list of kind of the most common ones, and you can click into them, it tells you. But for example, you've got generate before content, generate after content, generate before footer, after header, after navigation. So if you were creating, for example, this on This Week With, for example, we used a hook to add this button after the navigation, so you can kind of hook in to a location. Or if you wanted to have a banner, so on a single blog post, you wanted to have a banner just before your blog post that had an advertisement, for example, or some sort of notice, but you only want that to appear on certain categories. What you would do is we get this same display rules, where do you want it to be located, and we can then hook it in and say only show this when we're on this category, and you can actually select the category itself or a specific category. So this is where I think Generate Press is better in the templating area, and why I call it kind of templating engine, because we can hook in to existing templates, but in certain scenarios. So it's kind of like adding a condition, adding lots of blocks in, and then putting loads of conditions on inside the template for Oxygen. That's kind of the way that I look at it. However, you can use priority and you kind of separate them out so that they are not in the same template. So it doesn't, it doesn't make your template kind of sometimes messy, because you've got tons of these sections that are using different conditions to hide and show stuff. And again, you got the exclusion rules, so you can say everything except for these. If I show you here, we can go to down the bottom. Let's move that out of the way. I can say show this on the post categories of just newsletter, for example. So this would only show on the category if the category is a newsletter. And you'll see here, when you go to here, all of your hooks, all the Generate Press hooks are loaded into the drop down, and you can use it. There is the option to add a custom hook, which I will show you a solution that I created to be able to take it one step further, where you can create your own hook locations in your own templates. So there is a great example, is I have this page header, which I use throughout the website, and it looks like this. So this page header is basically a title with a subheading and a background image. This is my header that I use throughout the entire site. The user can very easily add in their own information. So by default, it pulls in the title of the page, and there is a custom field in the sidebar that allows them to set a little subheading, and that appears in here. So you can see custom field header title here. So you can kind of see the title of the page is slightly different to what they wanted the header to be. And then you got a description. And then I added an option to be able to enable a dark overlay. So if they wanted to use a background image with the featured image, it adds a dark overlay just so that you can still read the text. So that appears on the front end. And the way that this is set up is just I have a container with two post meta fields. Now this is where my custom functions came in. I basically have a function that returns the title, but it also checks to see if the custom field is empty or not. And if it is, it returns the custom field. Otherwise, it just returns the title. So if I show you that here, inside of my helper functions, I've got TCT header title. So I say get the field. If there is a title, then return that, otherwise return the header. In most cases, you can just set under dynamic data, you can just set this to title like that, and it will pull in the title. But because I wanted to give them the option, I've just written a custom function. The way I'm able to just call my functions like we did in the PHP return value for Oxygen is I have a short snippet that I wrote called, where is it? Dynamic content. Yeah, dynamic content. So I have my own key called TCT, which is basically like a prefix. So if any of the post meta fields, or when I hit post meta and I type in TCT header title, I think it was, I prefix it with the word TCT. Now that means I know that it's a custom function, and it will automatically call my function by default. Otherwise, it will just go and grab the custom field from that post. and like you're used to. This is something that I use, and I have cloud snippets. So whenever I create a new site, or if you create a clone site that you clone, it's just something you set up once and you forget about it, and you can then write all your functions and return whatever you want. It's an easy and quick way to return custom data like you used to, like custom functions, sorry, that's more than just return the title, return the excerpt or whatever. Now the client in this situation wanted a way to be able to, if I go to the front end, have the newsletter. They wanted to have obviously the same design, but they wanted to have this nice button, subscribe to VivoScene button, in it as well. And this is where you can use the custom hooks that I was talking about. So I've created a block that adds this hook location so that I can then create a new element and just hook my own information or my own stuff in. So you can add different sections and add your own hooks, and then just hook into the element, hook into that location using the standard elements templating system. So inside of here, you would go add new block. And in your hook, you just set a custom hook, and you would just call your custom hook location. So my hook looks like this. So this is a custom block that I've built, and it just takes in a hook name and it adds my hook wherever I put this. So if any of my elements try to call this hook from here, it will put it into wherever I need to. So I can go back, for example, I'll show you an example straight away. If we go to our page header and I add in my custom hook, and I'll explain how I've built these custom blocks, and say under description, we hit update. If we go to the front end of any page, you'll see that nothing actually is there. But if we go to our elements, hit add new block, our button, we can add a button. So hello, click me. We can say this should be on the entire site, because it's only going to actually go in where the hook location, where the hook is. So just selecting entire site means that it will just check throughout the entire site for that hook. We go down to custom hook and hit under description. You can hit publish. If we now go back to the front here, you can see hello, click me, and we've like hooked into our own template essentially. But I can say, for example, here, instead of the location, we can say, actually, I only want this to appear if the page is equal to about us. So I can say here, and you'll see that then should disappear because we're not on the about us page. Yep. But if I go to the about us, you'll see our button appears. So it's a really nice way of being able to hook into your own templates, and not just the generate press built-in locations. If I'm going too fast, please let me know. I know I talk too fast, and I want to make sure people understand. This is our single. It's an example of a single post, or not that one. Where is it? Single newsletter. I don't think I've set up a single post yet, but we use the block content template, which is the single post, and then you basically just add in the dynamic content, which is just your oxygen inner content, and then whatever's on the blog post will get pulled in essentially. And they've got again on there, this is styled so that on every single blog post, they have this header, and this is what they wanted it to look like. So if I go to newsletter, go to here, it pulls in the title dynamically, and then the page is just the information from Gutenberg. So that's kind of like the Elements templating system. I wanted to show the capabilities and how advanced it can be, while still kind of keeping it simple and organized. Your pages, again, so we'll move on to the pages. This site has a lot of, it's probably the best one. The client wanted to have pre-made sections they can drag and drop into the page. And this is where the pattern library comes in. So this is just a standard page. We've got a container to wrap everything, which gives it a max width, like we're used to with Oxygen. The grid, you can set widths. So this is kind of like setting your columns. You get the option for container width, so you can set 30/40, 30/70, or 50/50, whatever you want. We are getting Flexbox, so you will be able to use that in the future to stack things. But they are literally just headlines, paragraphs. We've got, kind of got a div in here to get a white background, and then other content. You can see we've got the button. And then we've got, if I go to here, they have their content is not very interesting, and they have a lot of boring stuff. However, we have something called the pattern library. This is similar to reusable sections in Oxygen, but they allow you to basically create and set up templates or pre-built sections that you can just drag and drop in and then change the content. Gutenberg does have their own reusable blocks, which is kind of like the Oxygen reusable blocks, where you update it once and it updates it globally across the entire site. I have quite a lot of patterns in here, which is probably why it's taken a bit of time. If I go to local patterns in here, so you can see here we've got lots of basically the same designs, just left and right in different colors. This was purely for them to be able to quickly mock up a page. So this is the generate blocks library, so you can use their online ones. They've got lots of nice pre-made stuff, or you have your local patterns, which is the ones that I've created for the client to be able to quickly build out a page. And all it does is, if we choose the 30/60 gray section, you click on that, it then just inserts it into the page for you, and you can then go in and my new heading, we can replace an image. Just use this one. I don't know what this is, but it's a way for them to kind of build out, and you kind of give them the tools to wireframe their site up. And it's a nice touch because, you know, for clients to be able to, or even you, to quickly build out sites, it's nice to be able to wireframe something, and quickly be able to build out pages. If you're used to frames or the Oxy-made templates and things, it's similar to that essentially. The backend speed, it's very, very fast and quick to swap pages. It's so much faster than Oxygen. That's a big plus for me. This is on 20i. This is hosted on 20i, and it's relatively fast. Obviously, my internet isn't the best. It's not too bad, and I'm also streaming, but changing between pages is night and day. It's so much faster than having Oxygen on some sort of shared hosting. You will notice a difference, and it shaves a lot of time off, being able to quickly build out. I built probably 20 pages of just dropping in these local patterns within about 2 hours. because it was just so quick to go back and forth to build them out, really. So we can move on to WP Codebox. So this is what I use for all of my custom code and snippets and things. A lot of them are set and forget, so hooks and things. So the way I have my code box set up is I have a helpers function. So this is for any custom functions that you write. That could be returning data or doing some doing anything where you're calling a function, basically. I have a hooks, which have a couple of default ones in here, which is element display. So this is how you can add your own conditions for the elements templating. So you can use PHP to hide and show rather than just having the drop down list of show this on a page or a post or an archive. You can, I've written my own has term newsletter category. If it has the term, then it hides it. I've got better examples on the other site, but I will continue through. Dynamic content. So this is what I referred to earlier, being able to use my own key to instantly call a function and return my own data. Render block. So this is how you can set conditions on blocks, again, using PHP. There is a nice visibility plugin if you prefer a UI, but the ability is there. And I just replace this with my function, with my class name. Oh, sorry. And then I return. So normally this would return to a function that returns true or false. And this function here, what I call, resides in my helper functions. I have a CSS folder, which has things like global styles, fluent styling, editor styles, admin styles, and things like that. And it uses Sass, which is nice. So you can kind of nest elements inside of each other, which is very cool. So you can say this a link only goes to if it's inside of the demo, and this actually outputs and pre-processes the demo button A. You can minify it and set where you want the location to be. And then I've got some just admin stuff. So the Gutenberg cleanup, I recommend you put this on all your sites. Gutenberg comes with, for some reason, tons of SVGs in the header and a bunch of global CSS variables. But for the most part, if you're using generic blocks, you don't need either of those. Adding items to top menu bar. So I added in WP Codebox and Block Studio as quick links. And then also I have a duplicate post function that just adds the word duplicate to posts and pages, so people can do it with that. So it means I don't have to use a plugin. And again, these are very much set and forget cloud snippets. When I install a site, I can hit download on all of these and they just get pushed straight into the site. And they're all set up there for me to use. We'll move on to the Block Studio. I'll go to WP Codebox on my personal site. Now, I have probably too many snippets on WP Codebox on this site, purely because I have, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 post types. I will give a quick run through of my site. It's like, think of Facebook, but for yourself, for my own personal. So I have a timeline which has my check-ins. So when I went to IKEA, I like to check into places, my Strava activity. I upload my calories and stuff. A lot of this is automated using Integromat. So, that's a whole different minefield. But I have a different card style for all of my different post types. And this is where the Generate Press templating comes in handy. So this is just a long kind of timeline that just keeps scrolling and you can keep going, basically. I have like sleep on here, for example. And again, these get automated. And a lot of this is back-end code that you won't need You know, a lot of it is a lot of calculations to calculate how these look and stuff, but the overall architecture is there. You know, you got my about page. This is just literally Gutenberg lists and stuff like that. And that's for the most part what my site is made up of. When I go into, for example, my Strava activities, you can see it loads a template for with a map box, but on a normal page. So when I go to an activities, it loads just an image. So I save on bandwidth and stuff. And yeah, so each post type has different cards, both for when they're in the loop and when you're actually on the single post page. In WP Codebox, I have a similar setup. So I've got helper functions, hooks, admin, CSS. But obviously, because I've got my own custom stuff, I've got like current data, which pulls my battery level. So 51% unplugged. If I were to, I can't actually plug it in, but it goes to my phone. Same with the time and the location and my activity rings. They're all automated, but I have custom functions that pull in all of that data with like REST APIs and stuff. But for the most part, you know, hooks, I've got quite a lot in here. So I have redirects, and so when people go to a certain page, I can redirect them to places. You know, the element display, this is a good example. I have stuff that gets hidden. So the template date archive only gets shown if it's the month, essentially, because the elements only gives me access to date archive for one, whereas I want to have multiple for the different month, year, and day archives. So this is an example of how you can use, you can kind of extend it. And again, I've got lots of different things here. So TCT post date returns the date, the post, but in a custom format. I've got my avatar. So this avatar that appears everywhere here and in the timeline here is actually a function that I wrote, and it just returns the image. So I can update this here and it updates everywhere. So it's just things like that. Render block. This is if it has an image, basically. And again, I just have a class on it. There's lots of things here which, you know, are very specific to my use case. But my helper functions, you see, I have a ton of them. And again, a lot of these are just calculating the markup for JSON data. Because of the way that I store all of my posts, I store stuff as JSON in a text field, which most people are not going to be doing. So a lot of my stuff is parsing this JSON, but it's the best way to store large amounts of data. But for the most part, everything else, you know, editor styles, removing Gutenberg, adding stuff to the same, you know, just splitting them out to make it easy to find what I need. You can put these into a child theme. I just prefer the UI here to be able to quickly find what I need and what I need, or where and what, should I say. And then we have Block Studio. So Block Studio is kind of the bridge for me of having the simplicity of Gutenberg generate blocks. And for me, I wanted to move away from using ACF a lot more. Now, I still use it for putting stuff into templates, so in the headers, like I showed you. But for things like a local business that have a services, I'm just creating pages, building those pages out, and then creating just cards on a service page that don't have any dynamic data or anything like that. And because, you know, I was going over engineering every little thing with Oxygen and ACF, that when it came to a client saying, hey, can we do this or change this slightly, what seemed like a simple update actually meant creating new ACF fields to support that and all of the rest of it. And I realized that these sites aren't huge. They don't get changed tons. And so, a lot of the, just over engineering and keeping it simple, basically. But there's still, I wanted to be able to build out custom sections and stuff. And Block Studio is the kind of bridge for me. So they allow you to build your markup and create your own block that can be input and put anywhere on the site. So a good example would be the contact page. So the contact page on this site, they have 3 locations. They have a USA, a UK, and a Germany. And I wanted a nice pin to put, the name of the location. And this uses the same block, but it just takes in different parameters. So when I edit this, you will see that I've got my, you can output stuff into the editor because it uses JavaScript. I just have a placeholder, but you'll see here on the right, on the left, you'll see it looks like a normal block. It gets added in like a normal block. And I've just got fields in here for latitude, longitude, and then just some information and stuff like that. And it makes it really easy to reuse because you can reuse the blocks. And I can get that functionality without jumping through lots of hoops. We've used this also on the training. No, I've used it on another one of these pages. Support, is it? There's another page that they use it on, but because it's, yeah, here we go. So they've used it again in another location, and because it's a reusable, it's just a block that takes in information. I can reuse it in multiple places. And this block looks like this. So you have a block.json, and it just has a bunch of fields. There's great documentation for it. So there are lots and lots of field types. So you've got all of these here, the standard ACF stuff that you're kind of used to, I guess. You have your index.php, which is where you basically just return your block information. So you can get, this is the equivalent of get field. And then you just basically output your HTML to the page. And then you can add in a script file. So you can put all your JavaScript in and all of your CSS styles. And these JavaScript and CSS files only get loaded if your block is on the page. So you can give, quite a lot of control to a client for, building out your own custom blocks with your own custom functionality. I do have blocks that I reuse. So the modal block is quite a nice block. So Jonathan had a great tutorial on creating a modal with Generate or Gutenberg, and I've basically moved that into a block which the client can then use. So if I go to the dermatology one, this one here, I have a modal here that I have the option to collapse it, so you can change how things look in the editor by using just like if statements. And then it supports inner blocks, so you can actually put your own custom blocks inside of my custom block, or you can put any blocks inside of your custom block, which is nice for if you want to give people a wrapper for something and they can put their own content inside. You can also limit it. So if I add the modal block again, you can add a template. So it defaults to adding in a container with a header and a paragraph. You can also lock stuff. So you can say you can only add a paragraph block in, you can't remove it, you can't add more blocks, but it gives them a bit of a nicer experience than having a text editor on the side. But the way this works is you have the trigger, which is what you're going to use to click on the button, and then under effects, under advanced, you add a data modal, and then you just add your trigger. And when we go to the front end and we click on our button, it loads our nice Gutenberg content in there, which is, very nice, and it's all accessible. You can close the modal and trigger it as well, so it's all accessible, which is great. And that's all just wrapped up in a modal block, and you can use this throughout all of your client sites. And if you've got more, if you've got more information, or you've got more stuff that's specific, you can just add a block. It's very, very quick, very, very easy to put blocks together. My block studio is on my personal site is quite lengthy. I have something like 40 blocks in here, which is a lot. But again, a lot of them are because I've styled I've got custom components that I've used which pull data like the weather and stuff like that. I have a checklist block, which is a good example of how you can lock blocks inside. So if I go to the idea board, you see you've got the checklist here. I can add in I can use the paragraph, but you can see it's locked here. So I can't actually add any more paragraphs in or any other block except for that one. So you can build out a template that you render to them, and they can only use the heading and the template or the paragraph, and they can't remove it and things like that. And then I've got basically an option here, hit complete. It supports conditionals, so you can show fields based on other fields. So when I hit complete, I get a nice date. So I can select the date, and I can add it says completed on when I've selected a date. But if I untick complete, you'll see it gets hidden. So it's a nice way to be able to build out blocks, but still keep control, but give them a bit of freedom for it. If I go back to my blocks, again, I've got a lot of information. I've got a lot of blocks that are kind of custom and things like that, for heat maps, the buttons. But if I show you my elements, which is the Gutenberg, also the generate press templating system, I've used happy files to kind of organize it a bit better. But you've got, see here, cards. So if we go to the activities, I've built out the card like you would, using a repeater. So I've got, my avatar, I've pulled in the title, my split block, which basically just pulls in the image if there is one, the date, the link to the post. But I've done this for all of my different blocks here. So my sleep, for example, is very similar. I've got it's a very similar layout. My blocks are just loading in here. There we go. So you've got my sleep chart, and a lot of these don't render in the editor because there's so many JavaScript stuff and calculations that they don't render properly, but they do on the front end, which is fine. And yeah, so I've got lots of different components which I hook into different locations. So I've got a previous and next for things. And that's, I guess, probably the, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to shout them out. But that's how I work, and why I've moved over to Gutenberg, because it gives me the control to have the flexibility of the simpleness, but also Block Studio gives me the control to quickly build out blocks that are a bit more custom and aren't, just layout and text and images. So, anyone got any questions? I know we've lost a lot of people, but
how did you find going from 5 breakpoints to 3?
A lot of the designs weren't overly complicated. It's something I take into consideration when designing it, but it's something that, you know, as long as you're not having really unwieldy designs, you're normally okay. You know, simple is better. You know, you've got custom CSS if you need to, but for the most part, I think the only time I ever struggle is with if you've got like a grid of cards, like blog posts or whatever, and you know they're squashing when they get to a certain width percentage. You may want to go put them down to a different size a bit earlier, but for the most part, you know, if you've got super complex designs, I would simplify them. You know, sometimes overly complex designs aren't good for UX, but for the most part, I haven't really struggled. Things kind of look good out of the box most of the time with the Gutenberg editor.
Cool. Pseudo elements, they're not supported in generate blocks, eh?
No, they're not. There isn't any support, but again, adding custom class and you can get away with it. It's, you know, it depends on how much you're going to use them. You know, for funky designs that use nice pseudo elements or tags, you know, it's kind of just adding a class once and you're there. You know, you can reuse the class, I guess, or you add it as a global style, and then you can style the global style with custom CSS. But for the most part, I haven't really had too many issues with it. I just kind of add it as and when I need them.
In Block Studio, are you?
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna add that there's a little bit of a different philosophy compared to Oxygen. Like,
Yes,
it's a lot more simple. Like, you do not need all of this stuff. You can have it if you code it yourself, but really you don't need a lot of the stuff that you think you need.
exactly. I think that's the biggest thing. And because I was building portfolio sites and I'm building brochure sites, there's like a lot of these sites don't need, you know, this site is quite a big site. There's like hundreds of pages, it's ridiculous. But you know, you don't need a lot of these dynamic stuff. You know, I know Kevin is very big on the ACF everything, repeater everything should be in a post type, everything should be. And yes, it's good to have templating. Yes, it's good to have that kind of thing. But for when the sites aren't huge and stuff, it's actually quicker to just build it in the editor and just duplicate, you know, for example, the checklist, for example, that I have, just literally duplicating the block and just adding another one. You know, I could have repeated it and then created a repeater and said, here, loop through all of them and output it. But it's, you know, it is very simple and it's a nicer experience, in my opinion, for both me and the client if they ever want to use it. Some people don't give client access, which is fine. But for me, it's so much quicker, I think. And yeah, you know, a lot of it is over engineering, I think, with the AC everything. Plus, the way that Gutenberg is stored in the database is far superior than ACF. So ACF, when you create one field, it creates 2 rows in the database for every single field that you create per post. With blocks, it's stored in one field no matter how much content you have. So I could copy this, duplicate this like this, and when I save this post, it updates one post. And the reason for that is because if we go to code editor, this is how Gutenberg is stored in the database. You can see it's stored with JSON with all your input fields of you know, the name of the block, the attributes, so the input like done equals true or false, your just paragraph, And this is how it's stored in one field in the database, or one row, should I say. So you can duplicate as many times as you want, and you're not going to increase your database size, which I think is a massive bonus if you care about the size of your database, and if you're going to have a bigger site. If you think about Kevin using, I think he uses MetaBox, which may only use one row, but you're creating one row for each. I think the repeater or clone field kind of thing creates one row for each field per repeater nested that you whatever. Whereas this stores it in one post meta field. And there's not a massive big difference to the experience, in my opinion, which I think is a huge advantage for storing in the database, especially with the size of mine. I mean, I'm up to, this site has got like 3,500 posts in it, so which is why I stored a lot of my content in every post as JSON, because this is only taking up one or two posts or one or two rows in the database. Whereas if I were to split this out into single fields, so I had a field for a good example is the activities. So here, if I go to here, you can actually see the structures here. If I had a field for photo, calories, distance, polyline, activity, for every single post, I'm having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20 rows in the database per entry, and I've got 312. This one's got 1,235. So the reason that I use a lot of the custom blocks is to parse all of this data, so it is stored better. But Gutenberg just stores stuff in the database so much better than Advanced Custom Fields does, and MetaBox, which is why I try and limit the number of repeaters I'm using and stuff like that, because using a repeater in an archive or like in a services page, why not just build a grid? Or even the query loop is quite smart in the fact that if you add in the query loop, we'll just use this one here. You can inherit query from template, but you can also select pages, and you can add a parameter, say, use all pages that are the parent of a certain page. So you can say, list all of the pages that are parents or child of the services overarching page. So inside of here, when we go back, I've got lots of child pages here. So about us has got careers, company, leadership, and you can set it so that it pulls in the featured image and it pulls in the title on this main page based on these child pages that it's got. So if you wanted it to be a bit more dynamic, you could do that way, but just building it out manually is quicker, better for the database, and it's not going to be too complicated for the client of an experience. That's the other thing, is I much prefer the experience of Gutenberg. I've had a client who's never used it before and said they really enjoyed it, compared to Oxygen, which they can't really touch or don't really know how to use. And so you're limited to having to use ACF. So that's where the difference is. Because Gutenberg is a nicer experience, you can give them Gutenberg, whereas you can't give them Oxygen. So
yeah, I feel like more developers should be converging on this, because you can argue all day long what your preferred workflows and tools are, but ultimately you're developing for clients, or if it's for internal use, the marketing department. I mean, this is just so vastly superior. It's like, even if it is more effort, even if it isn't your preferred workflow, like, suck it up, buttercup. I mean, it's not for you, it's for other people,
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that my workflow is the best workflow and you should follow this. I think if you're going to go down the Gutenberg route, you find what works for you. But I do think that you'll find that if you are someone that gives access to clients, they will much prefer the experience, and they'll much prefer being able to edit it, because the Gutenberg editor is built with React. It's very responsive. It's, you know, it reacts to your, you know, you can type in like a word editor, which they're going to be used to. And for me personally, being able to update and make changes so much faster. So I have actually a client I've built this site for, actually, and I've built 2 other websites for her. One of them is in Divi, which was one of my first ever websites I built. Second one is in Oxygen, and this is the third one I built for her. This one, she couldn't get, she doesn't really understand Divi. Oxygen, she doesn't touch, she just gets ACF fields. And when she came to me and said, oh, can we just update this slightly, it was like a massive headache, because I had to go and create new fields to support the new design that she wanted to create. Whereas this, she can come in, she can make changes to the text just as it is. These are 3 posts. I don't even use a post. I don't think I even use a loop, query loop. These are just literally 3 posts, and she goes into the pages and updates the dates that are coming up to the next date. And she's very, very, you know, you can see here she had a bit of trouble. There was a caching issue, so I had updated the changes, but they weren't on the front end, so I need to fix that. But that was just a caching issue. But she can come in and make changes. This is literally just a list with an icon, or a headline block with icons. Let me go this quickly. But she very much prefers it. She even mentioned, she said this is much easier to use. And she's someone who's not techie, and, you know, she does coaching, she doesn't do web stuff. So you can see here, I've just got posts for the 3. And when you click into it, it's just a page that it's got no ACF fields really. It's all just built out, and she has then control over the entire design for the page. So if she wants to make it different to the rest of the other pages, she can. I think my internet's struggling with the streaming. But yeah, I don't know, what any other questions?
I don't really have a question, but I would like to tell the anecdote that the last time you gave this demo for me and for some other people, I still have not, I'm only using the free version of GeneratePress and blocks. I have not done any of this like advanced stuff that you've showed, which is really cool. But I just want to stress that for new users who are coming from Oxygen, who do not know Gutenberg, who do not know GeneratePress or blocks, this is like all of the code you see, all of the dynamic data. You don't really need this for a basic client project usually.
Of course not.
So
I mean, I get, like I
it's
said,
a lot of advanced stuff. It looks scary if you come into this cold, you know, but you really don't need any code.
No,
to
you
make,
really don't need it. And like, I was trying to give an example of, you know, this site here, which has a tiny bit of it, but you don't need it. You know, a lot of it is literally just text and images. Whereas this site obviously is very, very heavily modified. But that's because it's my personal website, and it's stuff that you're not gonna need 8 post types and completely
this is the
different
flexing
design
version of
probably, but it's there, you know. And you can see here, like, just changing text, it's just like an editor. It's just like a text editor, which the clients can understand. You know, they can see, oh look, I can bold that if I want to, and then the link here, which she uses. And they understand it a lot more. You know, it's just text and images. So yeah, that's basically it, really. Any other questions? I know we've been going for like just over an hour 15, 20. All right, well, I will stop the recording. How do I do that? pause share. How do I stop the recording? Stop sharing. Here we go, pause stop.